Dusty's quiet ranch. A blush of dawn kissed the Montana plains, igniting the dewdrops clinging to the grass with amber and roseate light. Dusty Rivers, silhouetted against the nascent sky, was already immersed in the day's demands. A plume of vapor marked each breath in the crisp air, nipping at any exposed skin. He moved with ingrained precision, his calloused hands unerringly finding the gate's hinges, the latch's sweet spot, the gentle encouragement needed to guide a recalcitrant heifer toward fresh pasture. His herd responded with a bovine chorus, a morning salutation that resonated across the tranquil spread. Dusty gave a passing calf a reassuring stroke, a fleeting smile gracing his weathered face. "Easy now, little one," he rumbled, his voice a low, comforting rasp. "Good grazing awaits." Watching them fan out across the land, their dark forms punctuating the horizon, a sense of quietude washed over him. This was the cadence of his life, his reason. The land exacted its due, and in return, offered a solace unmatched elsewhere. Sunrise found Dusty completing his morning tasks. The rich scent of brewing coffee drifted from the ranch house's welcoming doorway, a modest structure standing as a solitary marker on the immense plain. Inside, utility reigned. A time-worn leather armchair nestled beside the hearth, a silent witness to countless evenings of quiet introspection. A single place setting graced a small, scarred table. Dusty filled a mug, the dark liquid sending tendrils of steam into the chilly air. He settled at the table, a plate of eggs and bacon before him. The silence pressed in, an ever-present companion. He ate with deliberate slowness, his gaze drawn to the window. Cottonwood leaves, dancing in the breeze, flashed like silver coins. 5 years. 5 years since Sarah's absence. 5 years of sunrises and sunsets witnessed only by cattle and the unyielding wind. He listlessly moved the food on his plate, his appetite diminished. Cooking had become a perfunctory act, barely enough to sustain him. After breakfast, he saddled Ghost, his dependable Appaloosa. They rode in taciturn companionship toward the gentle knoll where Sarah rested. The cemetery was a mere square of fenced earth, a collection of time-worn headstones marking the final repose of pioneers and forgotten souls. Dismounting, Dusty walked to Sarah's plot. The stark granite marker bore her name, her dates of life and death. Beneath, the words he'd chosen, "Beloved wife, forever remembered." He knelt, plucking at the opportunistic weeds that had sprung up around the base. "Mornin', Sarah," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Another day's begun. The cattle are thriving. Remember that little red calf you favored? She's grown into a promising young heifer." He paused, the silence a palpable presence. "It's not the same, not without you," he confessed, the words catching in his throat. "Everything's muted." He lingered there, the sun's warmth spreading across his back. He recalled her laughter, the sparkle in her eyes when she teased him, the tender reassurance of her hand in his. Memories, once vivid and sharp, had begun to soften around the edges, like aged photographs bleached by the sun. He clung to them, desperate to prevent their fading. The wind intensified, swirling dust devils around him. He rose, brushing off his jeans. "Duty calls," he said, his voice regaining strength. "I'll be back soon." Turning, he walked toward Ghost, the weight of his solitary existence settling heavily on his frame. As he rode away, he glanced back at the grave, a solitary sentinel against the vast, desolate panorama. The wind keened, a mournful lament that mirrored his own unspoken sorrow. The silent ranch remained, a testament to a love extinguished and a life lived under its lengthening shadow. He touched the brim of his hat, a silent adieu. The day unfolded before him, endless and empty. Eliza's unhappy home. The live bit at Eliza's skin, a persistent sting even through the threadbare cotton of her gloves. Agnes Bartlett, perched in the kitchen doorway like a carrion bird eyeing scraps, folded her arms. "Scrub harder, girl. Seems a pity to watch such youthful vigor squandered on drudgery." Eliza clamped her jaw shut, refusing to engage. She attacked the floor's ingrained grime, the caustic odor of a lie filling the confined space. The sun, a weak glimmer behind the grimy window pane, offered no solace. Squandered, Agnes repeated, her voice a gravelly drawl. Like my Thomas. Wasted. Eliza's gut twisted. Every task, every meal, every inhale in this house was a brutal reminder of their silent accusation. Thomas, her husband of less than a year, had died from fall while working cattle. A freak accident. Yet, Agnes and her viperous daughter, Martha, relentlessly nurtured the conviction that Eliza was somehow to blame, her very breath a curse upon them. Silence descended, heavy and stifling. Eliza scoured the floor until her knuckles blazed with pain, the old boards protesting under the assault. At last, Agnes emitted a grunt of approval. Enough. Go collect the eggs. And mind you don't break any this time. They cost enough. Eliza pushed herself up, her knees creaking, and escaped the kitchen, welcoming the change of scenery. The hen house offered a fleeting sanctuary, the hens gentle murmuring a balm compared to Agnes's barbs. She carefully gathered the warm eggs, her fingers testing the smooth surfaces. A small, speckled hen nipped at her hand, and Eliza crooned a soft greeting. It was the sole kindness she'd encountered all day. Back inside, Agnes was already laying out supper, her movements sharp with resentment. "Took you long enough," she snarled. "Martha will be home any minute. And don't imagine you'll be dining with us. You can eat what's left after we're finished." Eliza swallowed, the back of her throat tight. She knew confrontation was futile. Dissent only invited more vitriol. As twilight deepened, Eliza sought refuge in her small, airless room at the rear of the house. Little more than a glorified closet, it was crowded with discarded furniture and permeated with the stale scent of neglect. She ignited a lone candle, the wavering light painting elongated, grotesque shadows on the walls. She sank onto the edge of the cot, her body leaden with exhaustion, her spirit burdened with despair. The day's indignities played out in her mind, each remark, each gesture a fresh abrasion. She covered her face, fighting to suppress the sobs that threatened to overwhelm her. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Never. But the tears breached her defenses, hot and silent, coursing down her cheeks. She mourned Thomas, the life snatched away, the kindness denied, the freedom that remained a distant dream. She wept for Eliza Mae Bartlett, a phantom imprisoned in a home steeped in bitterness and rancor. Through the flimsy walls, she heard Agnes and Martha's laughter, its brittle edge cutting like glass. She wiped her eyes, inhaled deeply, and forced herself upright. She had to remain resolute. She had to endure. She would find a way out of this. The means were still unclear. The candle sputtered, throwing her shadow against the wall, amplified and misshapen. It possessed an almost defiant air. An act of kindness. Dusty Rivers rode into Harmony Creek, the sun a molten hammer against the brim of his worn hat. Buck's familiar gait and the saddle's creaks offered scant solace against the hollowness that had taken root in his spirit. Even routine errands felt like scaling a mountain. His gaze swept the street, the general store owner diligently sweeping, a pair of gossips flitting near the milliner's doorway, children lost in a marble game. The town thrummed onward, oblivious to the void Sarah had left. Hitching Buck to the rail outside the general store, the mingled sense of dried goods and milled lumber greeted him. A fractured yell sliced through the town's gentle murmur. "Can't you do anything right, you lummox?" A blind badger could sweep cleaner. Dusty's attention snapped toward the disturbance. He saw Eliza Mae Bartlett, shoulders slumped, listlessly pushing a broom in front of the Bartlett mercantile. Above her, Agnes Bartlett stood rigid, hands planted on her ample hips, her face a monument to contempt. Flanking her, Caleb and Jeb Bartlett grinned, mirroring their mother's disdain. "Look at her, practically kissing the dirt," Caleb drawled, earning a snort from Jeb. "Probably praying for scraps, the useless leech." Eliza's frame trembled, yet she remained mute, a silence that only seemed to sharpen Agnes's fury. "Don't you dare ignore me, girl. You're a parasite on this family, a drain on our resources. We took you in, gave you sanctuary, and this is how you repay us?" With sheer ineptitude, Agnes advanced, her voice escalating with each word. She snatched the broom, flinging dust into the stifling air. "You can't even manage a simple chore. You're worthless, Eliza Mae, plain and simple." A surge of outrage, banked embers suddenly fanned to flame, coursed through Dusty. He knew the Bartletts were tight-fisted and sharp-tongued, but this was a different order of cruelty. He refused to stand idly by. His boots crunched against the gravel as he approached, his jaw set like granite. The sound snagged their attention. Agnes pivoted, her eyes narrowing as recognition dawned. Caleb and Jeb straightened, their smirks receding slightly. Eliza, her face smudged with grime and damp with tears, lifted her gaze, a fragile spark of hope flickering within. "Agnes," Dusty stated, his voice a low growl. "That's enough." Agnes scoffed. "Dusty Rivers, what business is it of yours? This is a family matter." "It's my business now," Dusty countered, his stare unwavering. "To treat someone like that in open view, it's despicable. She deserves it." Agnes spat back, her face crimson. "She's ungrateful, lazy. She's a young woman, tried her best," Dusty interrupted, his voice gaining force. "And you're tormenting her in broad daylight. Shame on you, Agnes." Caleb edged forward, fists clenched tight. "You calling our mother a bully?" Dusty met his challenge, his eyes hardening to chips of ice. "I'm calling it as I see it. You two should be ashamed, just standing by and letting this occur." He turned back to Agnes. "Leave her alone, Agnes. She's done nothing to warrant this." Agnes glared at him, her fury grappling with a hesitation he couldn't quite place. Finally, she discharged a gob of saliva onto the parched earth. "Fine," she hissed. "Come on, boys. Let's go." She wheeled around and marched back into the mercantile, Caleb and Jeb trailing behind, their gazes smoldering with resentment. He watched them disappear, then turned his attention to Eliza. She remained frozen, head bowed, clutching herself. He knelt beside her, his voice gentling. "Are you all right, Eliza?" She looked up, her eyes wide with fear and a burgeoning sense of gratitude. A lone tear carved a clean streak through the grime on her cheek. She gave a near imperceptible nod, words failing her. Dusty rose and offered her a hand. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you cleaned up. A budding friendship." Dusty couldn't shake the image of Eliza's downcast eyes from his mind. The way Agnes had sneered, the venom dripping from her words, it felt all too familiar. Sarah had faced similar barbs from her own kin, though never the sting of a hand. He knew how those invisible wounds could fester. The next morning, before the sun fully crested the horizon, Dusty rode out towards a patch of wildflowers he'd spotted blooming riotously near the creek. He carefully gathered a small bouquet of bluebells and Indian paintbrush, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the dust-caked world of Harmony Gulch. He hesitated before knocking on the Bartletts' door. He wasn't sure what he'd say, how he'd explain himself, but he had to do something. He owed it to the memory of Sarah and to the quiet desperation he'd seen etched on Eliza's face. Agnes answered the door, her expression immediately sour. "What do you want, cowboy?" Dusty stammered, uncharacteristically flustered. "I brought these for Eliza." He held out the flowers, their delicate scent filling the air. Agnes' eyes narrowed. "She doesn't need your charity." But she didn't slam the door. Instead, she snatched the flowers from his hand and disappeared into the house, muttering something about foolishness. A moment later, Eliza appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise. She wore the same drab dress as before, but her hair was neatly pulled back, revealing a glimpse of her pale neck. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're beautiful. They reminded me of you," Dusty said, then immediately regretted the clumsy compliment. He hadn't meant it to sound, well, anything He just blurted it out. Eliza blushed, a faint pink tinting her cheeks. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he said simply. I know what it's like to be lonely. And so began a series of visits. Dusty would bring Eliza small gifts. A smooth, gray stone he'd found by the river, a handful of wild berries he'd gathered on his ride, a page torn from an old magazine with a picture of a faraway city. Each offering was a silent acknowledgement of her existence, a small spark of beauty in her otherwise bleak world. He never stayed long, always mindful of not causing trouble with Agnes. But in those brief moments they talked. Eliza spoke haltingly at first, her words carefully chosen, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. But as the days passed, she began to open up, sharing stories of her childhood on a small farm, her love of reading, her dreams of one day seeing the ocean. Dusty, in turn, told her about Sarah, about their life on the ranch, about the emptiness he felt since her passing. He spoke of the vastness of the sky, the quiet companionship of his horses, the solace he found in the rhythm of the land. He carefully omitted the details of Sarah's illness, not wanting to burden Eliza with his grief. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch swing, Dusty recounted a particularly silly story about Sarah trying to bake a cake for his birthday, and how it had ended up resembling more of a brick than a dessert. Eliza threw her head back and laughed, a genuine, unrestrained laugh that made Dusty's heart skip a beat. It was the first time he'd seen her truly smile, and the sound was like music to his ears. In that moment, he knew that something was changing between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, a budding friendship, a shared understanding, a flicker of hope in the face of despair. He felt a warmth spread through him, chasing away some of the lingering coldness that had clung to him since Sarah's death. He realized he was no longer just trying to ease Eliza's suffering. He was finding solace in her company, too. Threats and fear. The slap echoed in the cramped kitchen, a sharp crack that stung Eliza's cheek and rattled the teacups on the shelf. Agnes stood over her, chest heaving, her face a mottled mask of fury. You think you're so clever, sneaking off to see that cowboy. Eliza's lip trembled, but she refused to cry. Not here, not now. I wasn't sneaking, she mumbled, tasting blood. Liar. You think I haven't seen you? Traipsing off like some painted Jezebel. We took you in, Eliza Mae, gave you a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us? By consorting with riffraff. Agnes spat the words out, each syllable laced with venom. Eliza flinched at the venom, but a spark of defiance flickered within her. Dusty isn't riffraff. He's a good man. Agnes's eyes narrowed into slits. Good? He's nothing but a drifter, a low-born opportunist. He's probably just after our land. She grabbed Eliza's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You will not see him again. Do you understand me? Not ever. Eliza tried to pull away, but Agnes held fast. Let go of me. You will listen to me. Agnes's voice rose, cracking with hysteria. We are your family now, and you will do as we say. You owe us everything. You were nothing before we took you in, and you'll be nothing if we throw you back out into the street. The words, sharp and cruel, landed like physical blows. Eliza's spirit, already battered and bruised, recoiled. The promise of the morning, the warmth of Dusty's smile, seemed a lifetime away. Later, huddled in her tiny room, the air thick with dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light, she heard the heavy tread of her brothers-in-law on the stairs. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. The door creaked open, and Caleb and Jed filled the doorway, their bulk casting long shadows across the room. They didn't say a word, just stood there, their faces grim and unreadable. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, while Jed took a step closer, his eyes cold and hard like chips of flint, fixed on Eliza. Jed cleared his throat, the sound grating in the small space. Ma told us about your little friendship, he said, his voice low and menacing. Eliza swallowed hard, her mouth dry. She knew what was coming. She's right, Eliza. He's not good enough for you. You're family now, and we look after our own. Caleb's words were deceptively calm, but his eyes held a warning. Jed stepped closer still, invading her personal space. The scent of sweat and stale tobacco clung to him, making her stomach churn. You wouldn't want anything bad to happen, would you, Eliza? Accidents happen all the time around here. Folks fall down wells, get kicked by horses, things like that. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear as a bell. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew they were capable of anything. She'd seen it before. Just stay away from him, Jed continued, his voice a low growl. For your own good. He reached out and touched her cheek, the gesture sending a shiver of revulsion through her. You're a pretty thing, Eliza. It would be a shame if something were to mar that beauty. They left as silently as they had come, leaving Eliza trembling in their wake. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating, like she was trapped in a cage with no escape. The window offered a view of the vast, open sky, but it seemed impossibly distant, a cruel reminder of the freedom she craved. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the worn mattress offering little comfort. The walls seemed to close in around her, pressing down on her, stealing her breath. Fear, cold and clammy, gripped her heart. She was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a house filled with people who hated her. And the only person who had ever shown her kindness, the only person who had made her feel like she was worth something, was now forbidden to her. Tears finally came, silent and scalding, tracing paths down her bruised cheek. She was trapped, and she didn't see any way out. A proposal of protection. The air hung thick and heavy, smelling of wood smoke and simmering resentment, as Dusty reined in Rooster outside the Bartletts' clapboard house. He'd been drawn back, the image of Eliza's bruised face a persistent brand on his mind. He told himself it was about simple decency, about ensuring a wrong wasn't left unrighted. Sarah would have wanted him to do something. The sound of raised voices, sharp and acidic, spilled from the open windows. He dismounted, hitching Rooster to the porch rail. The scene unfolding inside was uglier than he'd imagined. Agnes Bartlett, a woman whose features seemed permanently contorted into a sneer, stood over Eliza, who was scrubbing the floor with furious, desperate strokes. Lazy good-for-nothing. You call that clean? A pig wouldn't wallow in such filth. Eliza didn't respond, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. Dusty could see the tremor that ran through her thin frame. A wave of protectiveness, fierce and unexpected, crashed over him. He stepped onto the porch and knocked, the sound echoing in the tense silence that followed. Agnes turned, her eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I need to speak with Eliza," Dusty said, his voice low and steady. Agnes scoffed. "She's busy. Get off my property." "It's all right, Agnes," Eliza said, her voice barely a whisper. She rose, her knees popping with the effort, and wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll be right back." She moved towards the door, her eyes downcast, avoiding Dusty's gaze. Outside, she kept her distance, standing on the edge of the porch. "Thank you for stopping," she said, her voice still trembling. "I couldn't just ride away and forget what I saw," Dusty admitted. The raw edges of his grief, still tender from Sarah's passing, ached with a renewed intensity. He saw Sarah in Eliza's quiet suffering. "Tell me what's going on, Eliza." She hesitated, then, with a rush, the words poured out. Years of servitude, of constant belittling, of being treated as less than human. She spoke of the relentless work, the meager food, the loneliness that gnawed at her soul. Dusty listened, his jaw tightening with each revelation. He'd seen hardship, faced down danger, but the casual cruelty of the Bartletts struck him as particularly vile. I don't know why I'm telling you all this," she finished, her voice choked with emotion. "It doesn't matter. Nothing ever changes." Dusty reached out, his hand hovering near hers, but not quite touching. "It can," he said, his voice firm. "It doesn't have to be this way, Eliza." He looked into her eyes, seeing a flicker of something. Hope? In their depths. He knew what he wanted to say next was insane, impulsive, born out of grief and a desperate need to protect. He took a breath. "Eliza, I want to help you. I want to offer you a way out of this." She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. What do you mean?" I'm asking you to marry me, Eliza. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. He saw the confusion, the fear, the burgeoning hope warring within her. Marry you? She repeated, her voice a fragile whisper. But you barely know me. That's true, Dusty acknowledged. But I know what I see. I see a woman trapped, suffering, and I see a woman who deserves better. It wouldn't be a love match, Eliza. Not at first, but it will be a partnership, a way for you to escape the Bartletts. I can offer you a home, respect, a life free from this. He gestured towards the house, towards the source of her pain. It will be a marriage of convenience. Protection. He held his breath, waiting for her answer. The wind rustled the leaves in the nearby cottonwoods, the only sound in the tense silence. The screen door creaked open behind them, and Agnes' shadow stretched long across the porch. A new beginning. The paper in Eliza's hand shivered like a trapped bird. Dusty Rivers' proposition, etched in strong, decisive script, pressed upon her with a weight exceeding any hardship levied by Agnes. Marriage to a near stranger. Deliverance from a life reduced to a slow, grinding attrition of her spirit. The attic's close silence amplified the drumbeat in her chest. Downstairs, Agnes' reedy voice harangued, as usual, about flower prices and the hired help's idleness. A relentless, stinging tirade aimed squarely at Eliza's self-worth. A glance took in her scant possessions, a crazed teacup, a quilt faded with time-worn blossoms, a hidden cache of pressed wildflowers, mere vestiges of a past life, fragile proof she'd existed beyond the Bartletts' oppressive orbit. Could she dare abandon even these? Gamble on an uncertain future with a man she barely knew? But wasn't even the vaguest possibility preferable to this gradual suffocation? Then, she recalled Dusty's firm grip, his gaze filled with a concern wholly foreign to her experience. He'd seen her value. The woman Agnes sought to bury under layers of disdain and toil. A sharp rap at the door jolted her. "Eliza, are you deaf? Get down here now." Agnes' command permitted no delay. Folding the note, Eliza tucked it into her worn dress pocket. The die was cast. Fear battled a nascent hope, a faint spark in the enveloping gloom. Main Street watched, eyes wide, as Dusty and Eliza stood before the justice. The ceremony was swift, unadorned. Dusty, his face set with quiet resolve, clasped Eliza's hand, his touch a solid anchor against her tumultuous emotions. The borrowed dress was plain, courtesy of the pastor's wife, but as Dusty slid the simple gold band onto her finger, an unfamiliar sense of belonging bloomed within her. Across the way, Agnes and her son seethed, their faces twisted with thwarted rage. Their scheme to drain Eliza of her labor, leaving her broken and penniless, lay in ruins. Caleb, the eldest, spat a curse into the dust. As Dusty steered Eliza away, past the gawking faces and murmurs, a surge of defiant joy coursed through her. She was escaping, leaving it all behind. The ranch was a universe removed from the Bartletts' suffocating confines. The boundless vista, the endless stretch of sky, infused her lungs with a liberating breath. The air, clean and sharp with sage and pine, provided a profound contrast to the stale, heavy atmosphere of her former existence. The house, unpretentious yet welcoming, radiated a comforting warmth. Sarah's essence permeated the space. In the meticulously arranged mantelpiece photos, in the delicate doilies adorning tables, in the subtle fragrance of lavender that lingered in the air. A twinge of guilt pricked Eliza, stepping into a life previously occupied by a stranger. But Dusty seemed to sense her discomfort. "This is your home now, Eliza," he reassured her, his voice soft. "Make it your own." He guided her through the property, showcasing Sarah's vegetable plot, the barn housing the horses, the meandering creek. He shared his aspirations for the ranch, the cattle he intended to raise, the shared life they could forge. That night, enveloped in a large, unfamiliar bed, the scent of wood smoke and leather filling her senses, Eliza succumbed to a profound weariness, tinged with something new, promise. The path ahead loomed, she knew, long and demanding, but for the first time, she wouldn't walk it alone. She now possessed a partner, a protector, a husband, and perhaps, just perhaps, a shot at true happiness. Confrontation at the ranch. A brown haze mushroomed on the horizon, each throb of Eliza's pulse amplifying its menacing approach. Even before identifying the riders, a cold certainty gripped her. Agnes, with her vengeful brood. Shame, a bitter taste, flooded her mouth. How naive to believe she could outrun them, that Dusty's sanctuary extended this far. The afternoon's tranquility shattered under a barrage of bellows and threats. 3 horses, sweat-streaked and skittish, halted abruptly before the house, their riders leaping off with a clumsy aggression that scattered the yardbirds. Agnes Bartlett, face contorted with rage, led the charge. Her sons, hulking reflections of her own intractable nature, flanked her. "Where is she?" Agnes screeched, her voice a raw rasp. "Where's that viperous little runaway?" Dusty emerged from the barn, deliberately wiping grime from his hands. His expression remained a cipher, yet Eliza detected a glint of steel in his gaze. His measured movements radiated a quiet strength, a paradox that both frightened and bolstered her resolve. "She's here, Agnes," Dusty declared, his tone even but unwavering. "And under my protection." A harsh snort escaped Agnes, like rusted metal grinding on metal. "Protection? She's family. She belongs with us. Step aside, Rivers, before you regret this interference." "Eliza is my wife," Dusty stated, his eyes locked on Agnes. "She answers to no one but herself." A warmth bloomed within Eliza, watching from the shadows. Never had anyone championed her so fiercely, spoken of her with such unwavering conviction. Caleb, the larger of Agnes' sons, cracked his knuckles, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "She bolted, stole what wasn't hers. She'll be back, willingly or otherwise." "She reclaimed what was rightfully hers," Dusty retorted, his jaw tight. "And she fled the torment you inflicted upon her." "Lies," Agnes spat, a crimson tide rising in her face. "We treated her like our own." Eliza winced at the brazen falsehood. The lies, the constant disparagement, the endless drudgery, the accusations, each had eroded her spirit, leaving her feeling hollow. "I witnessed your treatment, Agnes," Dusty countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous murmur. "I saw the marks. I heard the barbs. You won't touch her again." Tension thickened the air, a palpable force. Caleb advanced, his gaze locked on Dusty. "You gonna stop us, old-timer?" Dusty remained unmoved, a solitary sentinel against the storm. "I will." Agnes, sensing her son's hesitation, surged forward herself. "Eliza Mae, get out here, you wretched girl. You're coming home." Eliza trembled, hand instinctively flying to her mouth. The familiar tendrils of fear began to constrict her. But as Dusty subtly turned his head, his eyes briefly meeting hers, she gleaned a spark of resilience, a silent reassurance of safety. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, hope flickered within her. Taking a steadying breath, she stepped from behind the doorway. "I'm not returning with you, Agnes," she announced, her voice wavering but distinct. "I'm staying here with my husband." Agnes' face twisted into a grotesque mask of fury. You'll rue this day. You all will." She gestured sharply at her sons. "Seize her." Before they could react, Dusty moved to shield Eliza, his hand resting on the rifle slung across his back. A subtle gesture, but its meaning resonated with deadly clarity. "I'm giving you one chance, Agnes," he warned, his voice a low growl. "Turn around and leave. Now." Agnes stared, her eyes pools of venomous resentment. She recognized that look, knew that Dusty Rivers was not a man to be trifled with. She opened her mouth to unleash another torrent of abuse, but something in Dusty's implacable gaze silenced her. It was a resolution that mirrored her own stubbornness, a commitment that ran deeper than any threat. With a final, seething glare, she pivoted and stomped back toward her horse. Her sons lingered for a moment, their predatory gazes lingering on Eliza, before reluctantly trailing after their mother. As they departed, leaving a swirl of dust and animosity hanging in the air, Eliza watched them recede, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was safe, for the moment, but she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this reprieve was temporary. Agnes Bartlett was not a woman to concede defeat. Love and freedom. The sting of Agnes' words still burned, a familiar brand searing Eliza's soul. "Worthless," she'd hissed, spitting the word like poison as she shoved Eliza towards the unwashed dishes. "You're lucky Dusty took you. A burden. That's all you are." Eliza scrubbed harder, the coarse bristles of the brush a poor substitute for the tenderness she craved. She'd been scrubbing floors, churning butter, and mending fences since dawn. It never seemed to be enough for Agnes. A tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, mingling with the grime on her hand. Dusty found her like that, shoulders slumped, head bowed low. He stood for a moment, watching the defeated curve of her spine. The sight twisted something inside him, a protective rage he hadn't known he possessed. He crossed the room and gently turned her to face him. "Eliza Mae," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Don't you listen to a word she says. You're worth more than all the gold in California." Eliza's eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, searched his. "But Dusty," she whispered, I don't feel like I'm worth much." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the remaining tears. "Then let me show you. Let me show you every single day how much you mean to me." He looked deep into her eyes, a silent promise passing between them. "Dusty," she began, hesitant, "why me? Why did you choose me?" He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Because you saw me, Eliza. You saw past the scars and the silence, and you saw something worth loving." He paused, then added, his voice barely a whisper, "And because I think I'm falling in love with you." The confession hung in the air, thick with unspoken emotion. Eliza's heart leaped in her chest, a frantic bird desperate for flight. "Oh, Dusty," she breathed, I think I'm falling in love with you too." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a comforting embrace. It was a simple hug, but it felt like so much more, a promise of safety, a haven from a storm. The next few weeks were a blur of shared work and stolen moments. They repaired fences together, their hands brushing as they passed tools. He taught her to ride, his strong arms steadying her as she found her balance in the saddle. She learned to cook his favorite meals, the kitchen filled with the aroma of baking bread and simmering stews. They began to talk, really talk, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. He learned about her childhood on the farm, her dreams of opening a small shop. She learned about his life as a cowboy, the loneliness he carried, the yearning for a family. One evening, after a long day of working the cattle, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. The air was still and quiet, broken only by the chirping of crickets. "It's beautiful," Eliza murmured, leaning her head against Dusty's shoulder. "Not as beautiful as you," he replied, his voice low and sincere. She blushed, a warmth spreading through her chest. She reached for his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "Dusty," she said, her voice filled with emotion, this feels like a real marriage." He squeezed her hand. "It is a real marriage, Eliza. It's everything I ever wanted." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with love. "I promise you, I will always protect you. I will always cherish you. You are my wife, and I will never let you forget how much you are loved." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Eliza felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The shadows of her past still lingered, but they were fading, replaced by the warmth of Dusty's love and the promise of a brighter future. She was finally free. Free from the abuse, free from the fear, free to love and be loved in return. She had found her home, her family, her freedom, in the arms of a cowboy who saw her worth.